Hello, I'm David Hunt, CEO and founder of Hyperion Executive Search and your host for the Leaders in Cleantech podcast. Delighted to be joined today by Gavin White, CEO and co-founder of About Energy. Gavin, welcome to the podcast.
Nice. Thank you very much, David, for having me.
There's, as ever, a lot to unpack and a lot to dig into, but perhaps we could start with just a little bit of the elevator pitch or a synopsis of what About Energy are all about.
Yeah, for sure. So we're a battery data and modeling company. And we basically use our IP, which is measurement technology to measure batteries really accurately. Mm-hmm. And then we put that into tools to help people in the battery industry select cells, design systems, predict battery lifetime, etc.
Okay, so we'll obviously unpack a lot more about that because it's such a fascinating space, what's going on in the battery and energy storage space generally. But I'm always keen to look at the backstory. And obviously, we've known each other a little while. I think we met in Warsaw over a year ago at the Energy Tech Summit. So, but your backstory is interesting. So I just wonder if you could share a few moments of that, really the genesis of About Energy and how you went from, PhD student at Imperial College to founding a cutting edge battery storage company.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's quite an interesting story as well, as I get told a lot. And it really started out when I was a young child, and actually how I got passionate about engineering. Because I used to love watching Formula One, not for the racing, but actually used to have like a half-hour show before the race where they talked about the engineering innovation. Mm-hmm. As a young child, it was so fascinating because you could basically see the car changing shape every single week. And I just found it's so interesting. And with Formula One, it was like product development happened at such an intense pace. Like every single week, something would be changing. That's what really got me passionate and motivated about engineering. And that's what led me to Queen's University in Belfast to actually study mechanical engineering, like master's degree.
Okay.
And then it was while I was at Queen's, I got selected by Aston Martin for something called the Engineering Leadership Program. So they put me through like a year and a half of leadership and management training, but also included 18 months of placements at Aston Martin.
Okay.
And then, do you know the Valkyrie hypercar, David?
Yes.
Yes, right. So I got super lucky in that the last 3 months of my internship, I got to work on that hypercar project.
Oh, okay.
So
nice.
It's a hypercar between Aston Martin and Red Bull Racing. Mm-hmm. So Red Bull did all the engineering, and then Aston Martin were going to do the manufacturing. So I got to actually go to the Red Bull site like 3 days a week, and actually go in and see like the Formula One simulator, go to like the main office. I was in an office with Adrian Newey, who you might know is like one of the most like decorated engineers in Formula One. So on paper, it was the absolute dream job.
Yeah.
But unfortunately for me, I just felt there was like a complete lack in fulfillment in that job.
Okay.
We were building supercars for the super rich. Mm-hmm. They had no environmental benefit. There was no social purpose behind it. And I actually had like a real existential crisis kind of boiling out of that experience. And I knew that I wanted to work on something that actually had like a purpose behind it. So yeah, I actually had a real crisis, went back to university. I was the team leader of something called Formula Student. I don't know if you're aware of it,
No.
David. So basically all the different universities around the UK, but also around the world, they design and build these like Formula style race cars that they compete with each other. So you get all these different universities build these little race cars and then they take them to competition and compete. And it's a really good project because you, one, get to apply your engineering skills, but two, you develop all the kind of project management, the leadership skills as well. And while I was doing that, I was working on the electric Formula Student car.
Okay.
So trying to build a battery powered one. And as you can imagine, like 45 undergraduate students let loose on a little race car, especially a battery powered one. It makes it a very, very challenging project. So it was there I realized just how complex batteries were, as the electric vehicles. So then I took some time out after university, went to Australia. And it was just while traveling, really. I was reading, actually, it's very cringy to say, but reading Elon Musk's book.
Okay, yeah.
Like the very stereotypical engineer, right? But in it, he describes how doing a PhD is a great way to start a business because you get 3 or 4 years where you get your salary paid for. You get access to millions of pounds worth of equipment in university labs and academics that have extreme expertise in niche fields. And I always wanted to start a company ever since I was a young child, but I used to watch Dragon's Den, and I thought one day you just wake up and you have to have a brilliant idea.
Right.
And yeah, then it was really, as I got older, I realized that that's not the way that all businesses are started. Sometimes you can kind of take that space and develop the idea. PhD just is kind of ticked all the boxes for doing that. So the reason I went to Imperial College, as you said, to study my PhD was primarily actually to start a company. That was the goal from day one. And even in my interview for my PhD, that's what I told my would-be supervisor then, Greg Offer. So yeah, that was like the real genesis of like my story into like entrepreneurism and kind of the foundations for the company.
Yeah, do you know, that's really fascinating because, again, many of our clients and guests on the podcast are, come from that sort of PhD or academia, and sometimes it's a quirk of fate that brings them towards entrepreneurship. They discover something, they find that actually the lab isn't the place for them. But to hear from you that you're always kind of minded from quite a young age that actually it was more the business and the engineering rather than the engineering for its own sake, so to speak, or from an R&D perspective. So that's quite interesting. I mean, did you have within your family or circle other entrepreneurs or any sort of inspirations or role models that sort of led you to think that could be a career path for you?
A little bit. Like my dad's a cabinet maker, and he worked in many companies, often in management roles, and then he actually started his own company as well.
Okay.
I think it was kind of the flexibility I seen that he had in his lifestyle that the most attractive. Like if you had to take a day off, you could just take a day off. You were kind of your own boss, and typically you end up working extra hours. But what I realized is you end up working extra hours because you actually enjoy what you're doing.
Right.
And I guess it was like a realization at university, especially, that you spend like the vast majority of your your just life in general actually at work.
Yeah.
So best to do something you actually enjoy. And so kind of having your own thing, being your own boss, I think from a very young age, that really appealed to me.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's cool. But how have you found, by the way, because again, we'll talk more about, the last couple of years, because it has been pretty breakneck speed from your own perspective and the growth of the company. But again, some people's perceptions of entrepreneurship are somewhat different. And I get it within some of my family or my in-law family more so that, that you have all the perks of your own time and this, that, and the other. But actually, being a founder is fairly stressful and fairly full on, right? So it was, or has so far, entrepreneurship been what you expected, or what were the sort of the key, I guess, learning points in this early stage of the journey for you, early-ish stage?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think everybody always talks about entrepreneurship, that every day is different and there's a new challenge. That's like definitely what I'm experiencing. Like every single day, there's just something new and different. I knew it was going to be probably long hours, stressful, but what I've really come to realize is it's only kind of that from your own doing as well.
Yeah.
You could choose to, run a company at one sort of pace, and it would be a lot less hours, it'd be a lot less stressful.
Yeah.
Or you really push yourself and push the company. And like you said about energy, has really taken off in the last 2 years. And that's because we've really been pushing it. So yeah, it definitely has been like stressful and testing, but because we've like chosen for it to be that way. And that's the way we want to do it. But yeah, it's definitely been a learning experience.
Okay. And again, one of the key things you've obviously co-founded along with Kieran, was that something you always intended to try and find a co-founder, or what was the story that connected you guys at Imperial and the actual genesis? You touched on it briefly, but the idea of actually there was a business to be had from this, data, from this software that you're able to develop.
Yeah, for sure. So like going back a little bit, then I started my PhD to try and start a company. My PhD was sponsored by Rolls-Royce Aerospace. So at the time, they were looking at huge battery packs for airplanes.
Right.
The challenge that they actually had was they had these simulation models that would predict how hot these batteries get, but the models would take 2 or 3 weeks to just solve the actual model. So they would run on a supercomputer for 2 or 3 weeks. And this was too long for it to be useful in a development cycle.
Yeah.
So they wanted to make them much faster. So I started out my PhD being led by my supervisor to try and make these models much faster. And I think like 2 months into my PhD, I managed to do that. And I kind of validated it on a computer numerically.
Okay.
But Greg, my supervisor, he said the best research papers are always the ones where you provide the experimental validation. So you prove that it matches an experiment. So I went into the lab and tried to validate this model, and I thought this should be relatively easy. Like as an engineer, we have models that describe the mathematics. We have all of the input parameters, so like the fundamental physical properties you measure.
Yeah.
For a thermal model, they're like heat capacity, the thermal conductivity, so how heat is stored and flows through a material. And I did my experiment and then did my model, and the errors were like 50%, like these huge. You would struggle to think that the model was actually the same as it. Okay. And then I obviously turned to my supervisor and even Rolls-Royce and said, look, we've got these huge errors between the computer model and the real life. Like, what's wrong? Like, obviously the mathematics, math or math, so it shouldn't be that. And then they told me that these parameters are really difficult to measure. And actually what most people do is they tune the parameters. So you just keep changing the input numbers until the output lines up.
Okay, yeah.
And then as soon as you start doing that, you move away from what's called a physics-based model into something called an empirical model. And the problem with an empirical model is it means if you were to say, like, increase the size of the battery pack or change some of the cells, for example, the results now would just be completely meaningless. You would know for sure they're wrong. And so then I realized, I remember like business fundamentals, a good business always starts with a very good problem and a difficult problem, one that's not easily solvable.
Yeah.
And so the entrepreneur in me, like my eyes just lit up. Like this was a huge problem that made all these modeling results like massively reduce the value of them.
Yeah.
Academia couldn't solve this problem. Industry couldn't solve this problem. So that was the problem I just dived on, like 2 months into my PhD. And when I really drew it out on a whiteboard, like why this problem exists, it was actually quite simple. It was to do with how we take the measurements of these properties. Mm-hmm. And it's a problem that's very unique to batteries. That's why it's not been solved before. So I ended up inventing a new method to measure what's called the thermal conductivity of a battery.
Yeah.
And I remember walking into my supervisor Greg's office one day, just from our regular meeting, and I told him, I was like, Greg, I think I found something that we could patent. I think I've invented something. And thermal conductivity, I don't know if you're familiar with it, David.
No, not to any great physical depth, so do share.
So maybe I'll explain, especially for the listeners, is it kind of governs the temperature gradient you get with a material. And there's like 4 measurement methods that have been invented over the last 100 years. Like there's really not that many ways to measure this property. So when I went into Greg's office and told him I've invented a new one 3 months into my PhD, he was a little bit in disbelief. But when I drew it up on the whiteboard, his eyes lit up too, and he's seen like this was like novel.
Right.
At this point, it was a long, long way off us actually taking the measurement. Like it was literally just a theory about how we could measure this.
Yeah.
But then we applied to Imperial for a patent. And then I spent 2 years of my PhD proving to Imperial that I could take this measurement method. So I had to like develop lots of equipment, lots of hardware, do lots of validation, calibration. And through this whole time, I was going to start a business just measuring this one property of batteries.
Yeah.
But Greg had a good friend called Professor Emma Kendrick at the University of Birmingham. Mm-hmm. And together they actually seen a much bigger opportunity, which is they had lots of companies come into both Imperial and Birmingham asking for the properties of batteries to be measured.
Yeah.
And Emma had a very keen PhD student similar to myself at Imperial called Kieran, as you said. So me and Kieran get introduced by email almost 3 years ago. And the context was that our research is very complementary and we should start a business together. So it's probably one of the strangest ways to do a company, but yeah, that's kind of the story of how we met and like the very inception of About Energy.
It's a fascinating story, and there are so many aspects. Always often the case. There are so many variables, or almost like sliding door moments where things work. I guess to some degree, also there's that element of from what you're saying, at quite an early stage in your PhD, at quite an early stage in your career, you stumble across or create or invent or found this nugget that can be commercialized and solve problems. Sometimes that can, I guess, be quite tricky to deal with the fact that that's happened quite quickly? And again, perhaps if we move on to the fact that, as you say, the last 2 years of the company's genesis has been fairly breakneck speed. And lots has happened. How have you adapted from all of this, hardcore physics lab, inventing stuff, like you say, all new equipment, to starting to look at actually, how do I not build equipment, but how do I build a company?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely been a transition. And I think, like going back to what I said earlier, with Aston Martin sponsoring me for the engineering leadership program, that's really where I learned the foundations of like management, coaching, mentorship, project management. And then it was doing the Formless Student project where I learned how to apply them to a load of undergraduates that I didn't get to choose, that didn't get paid, and we had to build a car together. So I had that foundation of them skills. But yeah, through my PhD, it was highly technical. It was an extremely lonely experience in some ways.
Yeah.
Like with a PhD, you're kind of off by yourself, researching a very niche topic that after a year, even the other people in the office, they're not able to even help you on that. So I went from like 2 years of like solo. I had my three supervisors that were supporting starting this company together. To then About Energy's formed, and now we're at 15 people. So for me, it's been extremely rewarding, like really exciting. I love teamwork. I love working with people.
Yeah.
So being able to go from that like solo experience now into this team environment is something I've really thrived with. And it's been good to be able to pull in my skills from years previous and now apply them to something I'm super passionate about.
Okay, so how have we then looked at then, we've always said as much as anything, clearly technical innovation is one thing, but also business model innovation is equally critical. So how have you've obviously solved this problem that's not been solved before, and we touched on that, but how do you then turn that into an offering that you can then go to the market with, build traction in terms of, customers and actually paying customers, which every company of course needs. So how have you presented the solution About Energy has? How do you take that to market, and who typically are your customers?
Yeah, it's been really challenging as well, going from technology innovation into like delivering a real service and a real product. And when we started the company, from my PhD and from Kieran's PhD, we had a lot of technology and we demonstrated it kind of one-off to like publish these papers. And we got really lucky that some of our first customers were some of the leading UK motorsports companies.
Okay.
So like very high performance, like very niche. And so they sent us their batteries. We tested them, ran all these measurements, and it was there really being guided by customers, like what sort of level of quality they want, what they expect in terms of service. Then we really built our first products around that. So we've tried for it to be as customer driven as possible, like really going into like our customers, like what do you fundamentally want? And not just listen to the first answer, but really drilling in behind that.
Yeah.
Like why do you want that? Why this specific like error metric? And really understanding what they're trying to achieve and how they use it. And then using our own intuition to really build products around that. And now we've scaled that up to working with a lot of the leading automotive companies.
Yeah.
So the only one we can publicly announce is Porsche, but we're also working with many of the other European auto OEMs. As well as a couple of the big cell manufacturers as well.
Right.
And then off the back of that is all the motorsport companies, scooter companies, actually even a satellite company.
Okay.
Quite a wide variety of applications that these lithium-ion batteries are used in.
So have you evolved that into then an offering? So is it a services company? Is it a SaaS business? Is there you selling essentially algorithms? Or how is the model that you're again building your own team around? What is the product market fit you've touched on, sort of evolving that and really listening to the customers? What at this stage at least does that now look like?
Yeah, so today it's a products software company, but as you kind of spoke about there, it's been a real journey going from what was originally a services business. Where initially we thought somebody would send us a battery and we'll send them back like 2 pages of numbers that they can then input into their models. Very quickly realized that that's not very useful for people, just getting like pages and pages of numbers. And so we started building that then into these software products and these models just to make it much easier. And like our real goal, like batteries are unbelievably complex, and our goal is to try and make it as easy as possible.
Yeah.
So our focus now is on building these software products that really simplify kind of battery development. And then we provide that as a software product that they can use to design a battery pack, design a thermal management system, predict how long that battery is going to last, etc.
It's something that we talk about often with entrepreneurs is there's a lot of plates, there's a lot of moving parts to create a successful environment. And one of them is slightly out of your control, and that's timing. But clearly timing in terms of the evolution of the electric vehicle market and stationary storage and all those things is obviously has been going on now for a number of years. We've been active in it for a number of years, but really starting to grow exponentially. So did you see that happening when you first started? Because you talked a little bit about the genesis and being involved in the motorsport and sort of looking at electric vehicles. But were you surprised a little bit by how in the last 2 years that whole battery space has really started to scale in terms of both the creation of the gigafactories, but obviously far beyond that, the actual development of technologies and different cell types and different sort of chemistries?
Yeah, for sure. It's like absolutely incredible growth at the moment. And you talked about the timing being very important, and like the timing is often just pure luck.
Yes.
And us creating about energy, coming along to market with this technology at the right time, like that is pure luck. Like there's so much in business that is kind of that there's like an element of fate. And we got really lucky that when we were spinning out of the universities, we had this incredible IP to measure batteries really accurately.
Yeah.
But that's a long way off starting like a very scalable software company. And so we went through many phases, a lot of time spent trying to figure out how do we map our IP onto industry challenges in a very scalable way. And again, this is like timings that she just played into our hands almost perfectly.
Yeah.
Where big companies now they've often already built an electric vehicle, or they've had a dabble at trying to build an electric vehicle and realized how difficult it is.
Yeah.
And most companies would want to do this sort of activity in-house themselves. Like big auto companies are very famous for they bring everything that's important in-house. And we've came along with like really strong IP at a time when they're struggling. And that's allowed us to kind of get our foot in the door for them to use us as a service.
Yeah.
And what we're very confident of is that batteries are so unbelievably complex, especially how they degrade, that there'll be a continual need for this like long into the future.
Yeah.
So we're not just delivering like a one-off pilot project for these customers. That's now grown into accounts. And so like our timing into the market has just been perfect for allow us to kind of get that foothold. Because if it was a few years earlier, I think companies would have dismissed us and said that they could do it in-house. And a few years later, they may have built up the capabilities. So it's literally just the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
Which is this.
I think on that, I absolutely agree, because sometimes you do have to be, like you say, you're 2 years too early, 2 years too late. I started a solar business in 2007, literally 10 years too early. So that's an important factor. You've clearly benefited and are benefiting from timing. But that said, you've still got to take that to market. You've still got to take your IP, your idea, your technology, and translate that into people who are willing to pay for it. So, from a personal perspective, again, that's you moving from lab to, as the CEO, sort of the more commercial face. Obviously, in Warsaw, you were the face of the business at that point. So, how have you adapted to, and how have you found that transition to taking this technology, this IP, into having commercial conversations with people?
Yeah, I think a key part of this has been like the mentorship and training that we've had along the way.
Right.
Like since starting the company, we've been on, I think, 6 accelerator programs, which sometimes involve them giving us some grant, but almost always involve them giving us training courses. Yeah. So you go and learn about like a go-to-market strategy or marketing strategy or how to do sales, like the theory behind sales, etc.
Yeah.
So over the last 2 years, we've learned a huge amount about some of these like fundamentals and how to upskill ourselves. And then where that hasn't sufficed, we've really brought in experts. Like we brought in expert advisors and mentors, as well as a team beneath us. So we have like expert electrochemists, people in sales, business development, that have often like done this before for many years.
Right.
So we can really learn from them and give them the independence to go off and kind of do that themselves. So it's more about, one of our advisors puts it really well. It's like filling the bus with just really good people.
Right.
And giving them the autonomy to kind of go off in their own direction.
It's a good hiring strategy, as you know, and I've been working with David and our team. But looking at the top and the bottom, so firstly, to take on advisors. And again, I've seen in the past people through arrogance or naivety, one of the two, or a combination of both, being so convinced of their own solution, they find it hard to take constructive criticism from advisors. But it sounds like you've done the opposite. You've welcomed people above you in the sense of, people more experienced you to support from an advisory capacity and an NED capacity. Perhaps before we touch on your team, you can share a little bit about how you and Kieran went about and why you went about approaching advisors before just running headlong with some element of hubris because you've already done so well.
Yeah, for sure. So it was one day during my PhD, actually. I had a weekly meeting with my supervisor, and Greg told me that you become wise when you start learning from other people's mistakes, and you make them for yourself. And there was something about that just rung like home's so true. Like if I look back over many years before that, where it's very painful when you have to go out and learn mistakes for yourself.
Yeah, and expensive.
Very expensive. And in business, you often only get one chance. Sometimes you just can't afford to make that mistake. Mm-hmm. So that really rung home true. And then when we were doing these accelerator programs, we got to meet some incredible people, like incredible advisors that had been there and done that, started unicorn companies and worked as executives at huge multinationals. And a great advisor, what we realized, is not somebody that tells you what to do, but it's somebody that just keeps asking you questions until you're out for yourself. So they're like your guardrails, where they give you that freedom, but they keep you kind of penned in. Yeah. So it was really that. It's like bringing the right people around us and not asking them, oh, what should we do? But it's like, how should we think about this? Or what way would you approach this? And then them kind of asking us questions until we kind of realize like all the different aspects of our problem. Yeah. You have a problem before you and you fully understand it. Finding the solution, especially as an engineer, is like relatively straightforward. But often like with inexperience, you don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. That's really, I think, where advisors can benefit.
Okay. So flip that around then in terms of, as you say, you're now a team of 15 and growing. That mindset around bringing on the smartest people you can and giving them the autonomy to do their own thing within guardrails. Mm-hmm. We know as headhunters how valuable that is and how great that is from a hiring and a retention perspective. But a lot of people, again, because they're driven and convinced of their direction, often narrow down the opportunities for their team rather than create opportunities for their team. Just again, perhaps share some of your own philosophy around leadership of the people that work for you presently and how you treat and how you think about those people that you hire into the business.
Yeah, for sure. I think this really comes back to like culture as well and finding culture fit. And when I started the company, I always just thought that was a term just branded around. I never understood it. Like, what does it mean to like have culture or be a culture fit? And in hindsight now, it's really obvious. Like the culture is all about kind of how you communicate with each other, it's really your behaviors day to day. And like having that like collaborative, that honest, them attributes, that really comes like fundamental to behaviors. So this approach of hiring the right people and giving them guardrails and some freedom, it really comes if your culture is actually set up to enable that. Like if you're not going to be honest with each other, it will never work as to things are and aren't working. So yeah, I think it's been a difficult balance of like setting the culture right and finding the people that actually like thrive in that environment. And then, as you say, it's kind of my job to set the guardrails. Yeah. Because you don't want people going too far off tangent, working on products that aren't going to like actually deliver revenue for the business. But often that's quite easy to do. And the benefit you get from people having autonomy is then you don't really have to worry about them decisions so much. You can really focus on the bigger aspects.
That communication aspect is one that's easily overlooked. It's not just having the ideas or having the thought process of, and behaviors clearly are critical, but the behaviors are driven by, I think, the communication that people see and hear the same message in a coherent way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think like communication is so essential, and it being coherent. Like even pretty much every day in our company now, there's just so many different ways to communicate, whether it's Slack or it's email or it's in person or over Teams, and trying to like cut through all the noise and find out in a meeting like what were the clear actions we're taking away from this. Can be quite difficult, but it's so essential. especially as the team grows now, like miscommunications can be very costly.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a huge focus actually for us in the last 6 months. Is like just really tightening up and making communication really clear and concise. Like simple things like meeting minutes and actions, not what are verbose and list everything that was discussed, but just a few bullet points. Like, what are you going to take away from that? What am I going to take away from that?
Yeah. That
is really essential.
That sense of clarity. But yeah, absolutely. Culture is one of those things. I should say we all hear the quotes, but it's and I've worked with literally hundreds of startups over the last 10 years, and it's great to see one who really kind of gets that. And of course, there are many others, but that understands what culture is and what it isn't. And it's not just symbols or words or directions or dictatorial kind of or autocratic kind of methodologies. It's really about communication and teamwork. So it's great that again you're on that journey. Perhaps we can move looking a little bit forward, because you've been on accelerators, you've had a bit of grant funding, but you haven't done any big rounds so far. You relatively bootstrapped at least, but you clearly made an awful lot of traction in the last couple of years. What does the next couple of years look like for About Energy?
Yeah, for sure. So like you say, we've kind of been running on fumes now for the last 2 years. So we've raised £1.5 million to date, which if somebody told me that 2 years ago, I would have said that's a huge amount of money. But to have like 15 employees, to be running a lab and an office, like that's almost nothing. And we've been really lucky that we have revenue coming in from some big customers that have helped support that. And over the last 2 years, we've really been just perfecting like our products, our lab capability to deliver these products and these models very efficiently. And now we're getting ready to raise our Series A, where we really want to take that and now scale it. Yeah. Scale it within them companies, so growing the key accounts that we already have, as well as finding new customers and new companies. But it's really about now, we feel like the time is right where we have what investors would call product market fit. Yeah. And to now take that and really scale it across different companies and markets.
So there's two angles. One, of course, is geographic, and you're already obviously European in your approach, possibly beyond. You can tell us that. So there's obviously a geographic expansion because it's a global marketplace for batteries, of course. And of course, the other is the fact whilst lithium still dominates and probably will in many regards for some time, but there are increasingly new forms of chemistries in batteries, let alone outside of batteries themselves. So have you plans to, or I guess to make sure that you stay able to offer the same level of services, both as you expand geographically and as technologies evolve?
Yeah, for sure. So geographically, our main customer base is actually mainland Europe at the moment. Mm-hmm. We definitely see the US opening up. Like my impression when I went to the US last summer for the battery show was that they're maybe 1 or 2 years behind in terms of experience and technology. Yeah. But the rate at which they're catching up is just incredible. Like the Inflation Reduction Act in the US just has an insane number of battery projects kicking off. So yeah, that's going to be a huge market for us over the next few years. And then on the chemistry wise and technology, the fundamental technology is measurement IP. So it doesn't really matter whether it's lithium-ion or sodium-ion. For example, could even be a Duracell battery. It's all fundamentally the same. So our core technology works across them different chemistries, but proving it and getting the validation is what we're working on at the moment. Yeah. We've already started testing. You're probably familiar with sodium-ion cells.
Yeah. We had a client on recently, Lena Energy was actually on the podcast recently, who are creating sodium cells. So.
Yeah, so there's quite a few companies now making innovations with sodium-ion, like Northvolt as well, announced at the end of last year their new sodium-ion chemistry. So, but then even within lithium-ion, you've got the NMC chemistry, you've got LFP. The new one now is LMFP, so lithium manganese iron phosphate. So it's basically LFP with some manganese thrown in there, which improves its energy density.
So taking out the cobalt as well?
So in LFP, there's no cobalt. It's lithium iron phosphate. Yeah. So by adding manganese in, you improve the energy density and the power you can get from the cell. And it has some subtle differences on the modeling side, the measurement side. So that's kind of what we're working on. But so yeah, basically one part of the business is testing these new chemistries, staying ahead. Yeah. And then the rest of the business is taking what we already have and productizing it and selling it. So.
And do you differentiate by, you've always touched on obviously working with a lot of automotive companies who by definition often try and keep things in-house, and but you also touched on working with some cell companies. Do you differentiate or have different approaches to the e-mobility related batteries versus stationary storage, for example?
Yes, well, fundamentally the batteries are all the same, but like the value propositions and what you can use our products for changes.
Yeah.
So it's like our messaging, our sales, marketing messaging changes depending on whether it's automotive, whether it's stationary energy storage, whether it's aerospace. But the fundamental technology and the product is the exact same.
Yeah.
So that's like one of the ways we've been able to scale this so quickly is by keeping the product the same and just tuning the sales and marketing messaging to really hit on the pain points of them different industries.
Yeah. So let's jump back, Gavin, in terms of your journey. You made clear that you already had in mind to start a business from early doors, but you've been doing this now for a few years. What have been some of the biggest challenges and biggest rewards that you've personally had over the last 2 or 3 years of building the company?
Yeah, I'd almost say that probably both the biggest challenges and the biggest rewards have been people.
Yeah.
It was one thing learning about management, leadership, coaching, mentorship, a whole different thing applying it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think one of the biggest rewards has been bringing incredibly talented people together, giving them the skills, the resource to then build incredible products or develop incredible technology. So that's been super rewarding and kind of that team element.
Yeah.
But it's also been a challenge. You bring lots of very high performance people together under a high pressure, fast paced environment. And that can be difficult, good communication, etc. So yeah, it's a constant kind of battle between, giving the team the tools to really enable their success and then making sure that actually happens.
Yeah. That takes a lot of time, doesn't it? And when, as a CEO at any company, particularly in the startup, there are a myriad things you could and should be doing from fundraising to client side to product side to pretty much everything else. So, how have you found trying to manage all of those different aspects?
Yeah, I think our advisors put it really well in that often when it comes to creating a startup, it's the things you choose not to do that will kind of decide on your success.
Yeah.
We're opportunity constrained, so there's way too many opportunities ahead of us, way too many different products we could develop, markets we could target, etc. But it's picking the ones that we won't do. I think that's where the differentiation is going to be. So the way we really think about it is, which of these grants, customers, markets should we not do and not focus on, and then we'll give everything we have to whatever's left. So I think I've definitely found that a more useful way to think about it. Instead of thinking what you are going to do, just think about what you won't do.
That's a real challenge, isn't it? Because again, as entrepreneurs, and there's always a need to pay the bills, and there's always the shiny thing that you know that you could achieve. So again, you've touched on it, help from the advisors in that regard, but having the ability to say no is, I think it's Charlie Munger, who's one of his quotes, I can't remember off the top of my head, but essentially it's, your success is derived by what you say no to rather than what you say yes to. So it's some of the thing you're saying there, but it can be really tempting when there's huge opportunities and shiny things and people want you to do something and want to pay you money to do it.
Yeah, definitely, especially as an engineer and a technology fan. Often the most exciting project is the most difficult one.
Yeah.
The newest chemistry, the most demanding application. But in business, they're the kind of projects you need to just run away from. So yeah, it's definitely a balance, and we want to be a technology leader long term.
Yeah.
So we're finding to pick and choose our battles. And often when you're kind of open and honest about this with some of these very technology leading customers, they can also see that as well. And then you start to build out. You stop saying no and you start to build out a roadmap. They're saying, oh, no, we're not going to work with you. We move on. It's okay, well, let's just talk about a roadmap to us working together on a project like this. Even if it's 2 years or 3 years away, it's well, how do we get there? If you want us to help you with this, then you've got to help us in the short term and kind of work together. So yeah, I think it's been difficult in terms of just trying to pick, especially trying to forgo my own kind of selfish reasons for wanting to do the funnest, the coolest things.
Yeah.
It's more on like what's the things that are going to deliver real like business impact.
That's a core internal challenge, as you touched on already. There's the kind of the drawer of the engineer that says, "Oh, this is really tricky. Let me do that," and then the business says that actually that's a world of pain if you go down that path. So, must be difficult sometimes with those two different voices on your shoulders.
Yeah, I'm sure you faced it as well over the years. It can be difficult, but yeah, now I feel like our path is really set. Like we have a very clear path forward in terms of we've got great customers, which we can grow the accounts with. We've got great products. We know what markets are going to have big impact in. So for us, we have a very clear path forward now, and a lot of them decisions have been made. So now it's about raising the money to actually execute on that path.
Sure. Okay. And are you in a position at this stage? You talked about launching an A round. Is that imminent? Are you able to share any of that, or is that not quite ready for market consumption just yet?
No. It's probably the worst kept secret. So the plan is to launch around probably Q2 of this year. So yeah, we're speaking to a number of investors about that A round, and obviously always welcome more. So if any investors are listening, please reach out.
I'm sure there will be, and very happy we can talk offline about making some introductions there as well. Cool. Okay, so maybe just take a little bit of a broader view. You know, we're at Hyperion, and I'm personally passionate about the electrification of everything, or everything possible. Clearly, there are places where hydrogen and other things can play a part, but certainly the electrification of most things. How do you see, from a battery perspective, but not just an about energy perspective, the next few years in that electrification journey and the evolution of batteries in many different applications?
Yeah, for sure. So there's obviously a huge amount of growth still to occur. And I think what's clear for us is that it's really going to be cost driven. Like we've seen even just literally the last few months, like the pullback from automotive companies around electric vehicles, and them just being so expensive and difficult to make a profit on. And that doesn't apply to just electric vehicles. That's stationary energy storage. That's electric scooters, electric bikes. Like an electric bicycle can be like £2,000. So for us, it's really about, we need to move to electrification for sustainability long term. The technology is there to support it. Like battery products now can often be better performing than petrol or diesel equivalent. But it's about how do we do this in a very cost-effective and like genuinely sustainable way. Like anybody can throw a battery in a car, but it needs to then last for like 10 years before it's beneficial for the environment. So for us, there's a huge amount of challenges still to incur, but our mission is to make it as low cost and as simplified for people as possible.
Right.
But also give people the opportunity to learn along the way. So we deliver all of our stuff in something called a white box solution. So it works out of the box. You can just plug it into your current workflows and it will do its job. But you can also go inside it, explore it, edit it. So you kind of get that understanding and learning as well. So I like that's where I see the challenges for the industry is how do we scale this now cost effectively and in a very like time efficient way.
Yeah. I think that's where everything comes down to is scale and affordability, and obviously those things go hand in hand. Often the case with obviously scale creating things more affordable. But as you say, huge journey still to go, and appreciate you sharing your journey and a bit of your personal background and what's going on at About Energy with the audience. We'll make sure that we share on the podcast page, Gavin, links to yourself and to About Energy so people can find out more. Of course, if you are one of our VC audience, then feel free to reach out to Gavin. Likewise, the details will be on the episode page. But thanks very much for sharing the journey so far. It's been great to have been working with you and obviously watching what's been going on over the last couple of years. And long may that continue. Thank you very much for joining us, Gavin.
Nice. Really appreciate it, David. Thank you.